$7 billion. One pipeline. Zero public debate until a Financial Times investigation forced every major power to explain why a project connecting Iran to Pakistan suddenly matters more than 3 decades of American sanctions policy combined. The route cuts through some of the most contested territory on Earth. The financing comes from a country Washington spent years trying to isolate, and the completion date sits exactly when global energy markets face their most dangerous supply crunch since 1973. And here's what this means for anyone filling a gas tank anywhere on the planet. This pipeline doesn't just move natural gas across a border, it rewrites who controls energy flow in a region containing 40% of the world's proven reserves. Every calculation about oil prices, every assumption about dollar dominance in energy markets, every strategic plan built on the idea that America decides who sells energy to whom, all of it gets stress tested the moment Iranian gas starts flowing into Pakistani power plants, under terms that bypass every Western financial institution. This channel runs on no corporate funding, no government backing, and no advertising pressure telling us what to leave out. The analysis that needs to happen about what Professor Mohammed Marandi revealed in his breakdown of the Financial Times report is not happening on mainstream platforms. It's happening here. If you want to understand the energy chokehold that's being broken before the mainstream media admits it's even loose, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. At 7:43 a.m. London time on March 18th, the Financial Times published a detailed investigation into the Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline. The piece ran 4,000 words. It included leaked internal documents from 3 separate governments. It quoted 16 different officials spanning Pakistani energy ministries, Chinese state financing arms, and Iranian oil sector administrators. And it confirmed what regional analysts have been whispering for 18 months but couldn't prove. The project everyone assumed was dead is not just alive, it's 87% complete on the Iranian side of the border. The official narrative from Washington for the past 2 years has been consistent. Senior State Department officials testified before Congress in July 2023 that the pipeline posed no immediate concern because Pakistan lacked the financing to complete its portion of the route. Treasury sanctions experts told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in October 2023 that Chinese banks wouldn't touch the project due to secondary sanctions risk. And as recently as January 2025, a Pentagon briefing to defense reporters described the pipeline as effectively abandoned, calling it a relic of an earlier era when Pakistan thought it could balance between Washington and Beijing. The Financial Times documents show something completely different. Pakistan signed a revised construction agreement with Chinese state contractor CPECC in November 2024. The financing structure uses Chinese yuan-denominated loans that never touch the SWIFT system or any American financial institution, and the construction timeline projects gas flow by fourth quarter 2026, 18 months from now. Not abandoned, not stalled. 18 months from operational. Here's what they're not telling you about how this project survived every pressure Washington could apply. The original 2013 agreement died exactly the way American diplomats intended. Pakistan couldn't secure financing. Every Western bank that even considered the project received direct calls from Treasury officials explaining the consequences. International contractors backed away. The timeline slipped from 2016 to 2018 to 2020 to indefinite postponement. American pressure worked perfectly for a decade. But then something shifted that doesn't show up in any official briefing. In March 2023, Pakistani officials made 3 separate trips to Beijing, not to ask for money, to propose a new structure where China provides equipment and expertise, while Pakistan pays in rupees converted to yuan at agreed intervals, with the entire transaction happening through the China International Payment System. No dollars, no SWIFT codes, no American visibility into the transaction flow, and no leverage point for Treasury to apply pressure. The technical challenge Pakistan faced wasn't just financing. It was building 780 kilometers of pipeline through Balochistan province, where separatist groups have attacked energy infrastructure for 2 decades. The original route required 16 separate compressor stations. Each station needed consistent power supply in a region where the electrical grid fails multiple times per week. The engineering firms that evaluated the project between 2015 and 2022 all reached the same conclusion: technically feasible, but operationally impossible without security guarantees no one could provide. Chinese engineers solved this with a solution that reveals how belt and road infrastructure actually works in unstable regions. Instead of 16 compressor stations requiring external power, they redesigned the system around solar-powered booster stations, with battery backup sufficient for 72 hours of operation. Instead of a single pipeline vulnerable to one successful attack shutting down the entire system, they spec'd parallel smaller diameter lines that can operate independently. The construction cost increased by 40%. The timeline stretched by 14 months, but the vulnerability to local disruption dropped by more than half. Professor Morandi's analysis of the Financial Times report focuses on one sentence buried in paragraph 47. Iranian officials confirmed to the newspaper that gas pricing for Pakistan would be set in yuan with a discount structure tied to long-term purchase commitments rather than spot market rates. That sentence contains the entire strategic shift. Pakistan isn't just buying gas, it's locking in energy prices disconnected from dollar denominated global markets while simultaneously reducing dependence on liquefied natural gas imports that currently cost the country $8 billion annually in foreign exchange. What the official statements from Islamabad won't say plainly is that Pakistan's current energy crisis makes this pipeline an existential necessity rather than a strategic choice. The country faces power shortages exceeding 6,000 megawatts during peak summer demand. Industrial zones in Punjab and Sindh provinces operate on load shedding schedules where electricity is available only 16 hours per day. The textile sector, 25% of export earnings, has seen production capacity utilization fall from 89% in 2021 to 62% in 2024 because factories can't run full shifts without consistent power. Iranian gas solves this in a way that liquefied natural gas imports cannot. LNG requires port infrastructure, regasification plants, and storage facilities that take 5 years to build and cost $12 billion that Pakistan doesn't have. The pipeline delivers gas directly to existing distribution networks in Sindh and Punjab provinces, where 70% of Pakistani industrial capacity sits within 50 kilometers of the planned connection points. First gas flow provides an immediate injection of 750 million cubic feet per day. At full capacity by 2028, that number reaches 1.2 billion cubic feet daily, enough to cut Pakistan's LNG import bill by 60%. Now here's the math that Washington doesn't want calculated in public. Every cubic foot of Iranian gas that flows into Pakistan is 1 cubic foot of LNG that doesn't get purchased from American exporters or Qatari suppliers. Pakistan's current LNG import volume sits at 1.4 billion cubic feet per day at an average landed cost of $11 per million BTU. The Iranian pipeline gas pricing, according to the leaked contract terms published by the Financial Times, works out to approximately $6.50 per million BTU with the yuan discount structure factored in. Run that calculation across a full year of operations at projected capacity. Pakistan currently spends $8 billion annually on LNG imports. The pipeline gas at full capacity replaces approximately $5 billion of that LNG volume. But the price differential means Pakistan pays only $3.2 billion for the same energy content. The annual savings, $4.8 billion in foreign exchange that stops flowing to Western energy companies and Middle Eastern gas suppliers. That's $4.8 billion per year that doesn't require dollar financing. $4.8 billion that doesn't touch American banks. $4.8 billion in trade flow that moves entirely through Chinese payment systems in yuan, and that's just Pakistan's side of the equation. Scale this model across the 14 other countries in China's Belt and Road Energy Infrastructure Program, and you're looking at $200 billion in annual energy trade being pulled out of dollar-denominated markets over the next decade. The replacement arithmetic reveals an asymmetry American policy has no answer for. The United States produces 75 million cubic feet per day of LNG for export. Iran's total gas reserves exceed 1.2 quadrillion cubic feet, second largest in the world after Russia. America can sanction Iranian energy exports. It cannot sanction Iranian gas reserves or the pipelines that deliver them to neighboring countries outside Washington's financial architecture. One is a policy lever. The other is geology and engineering. The math doesn't care about sanctions. Iran currently operates pipelines to Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. The Pakistan route becomes the fourth active export line. Iraq has signed preliminary agreements for a fifth connection. Afghanistan is negotiating a sixth. India maintains quiet technical discussions about an extension of the Pakistan line, despite public opposition to anything that might violate American sanctions. Each connection creates a new flow of energy trade that bypasses dollar settlements and Western financial oversight. Here's the number that changes the entire strategic picture. Iran's total pipeline export capacity by 2027, assuming current projects complete on schedule, reaches 3.8 billion cubic feet per day. At current natural gas prices and accounting for the yuan discount pricing structure Iran offers to avoid sanctions complications, that represents approximately $42 billion in annual export revenue. All of it flowing through non-dollar payment channels. All of it building trade relationships that reduce dollar dependency across Central and South Asia. Chinese state banks financing these projects aren't making charitable investments. The loans carry interest rates between 4 and 6%, higher than Western development bank rates, but lower than commercial financing Pakistan or Iran could access independently. The terms stretch 20 to 25 years, and the contracts include provisions that give Chinese companies preferential access to future energy infrastructure projects across both countries. This is patient capital deployed to reshape regional energy architecture in ways that reduce American leverage one pipeline at a time. Beijing's energy security calculation centers on a problem that keeps Chinese strategic planners awake at night. 80% of China's oil imports flow through the Strait of Malacca, a choke point the U.S. Navy could shut down in approximately 48 hours in any serious confrontation. Chinese natural gas imports follow similar maritime routes. Any disruption to sea lanes means Chinese industrial centers and power generation capacity start shutting down within weeks. Overland pipelines from Central Asia, Russia, and now indirectly from Iran through Pakistan create alternative supply routes that no navy can blockade. The volumes don't match seaborne imports. They don't need to. They need to provide enough supply diversity that China can survive a maritime blockade long enough to make such a blockade economically catastrophic for whoever attempts it. The Iran Pakistan pipeline isn't about Pakistani energy security from Beijing's perspective. It's about Chinese strategic depth against American naval dominance. Russia is watching this construction closely and drawing very specific conclusions. Moscow operates the world's most extensive pipeline network for natural gas exports. Most of it flows west into Europe, where customers now actively work to eliminate Russian gas dependency following the Ukraine invasion. The eastern pivot toward Asia makes perfect strategic sense, but faces an infrastructure problem. Pipelines take 5 to 7 years to build and cost billions of dollars per thousand kilometers. What the Iran-Pakistan project demonstrates is that Chinese financing can compress those timelines and accept risks Western lenders won't touch. Russia's Power of Siberia 2 pipeline to China has been in planning stages since 2019, with limited progress on actual construction. Chinese hesitation wasn't about demand, it was about bearing all the financing risk while Russia maintained pricing leverage. The Iran-Pakistan model, where China provides construction capability and financing in exchange for long-term supply agreements at predetermined price bands, gives Beijing a template it can apply to Russian negotiations. If Power of Siberia 2 moves forward under similar terms, Russia gains approximately 1.3 trillion cubic feet per year in new export capacity to Asian markets by 2029. That volume replaces roughly 40% of what Russia exported to Europe in 2021 before the war. Combined with existing eastern pipelines and the Iran-Pakistan framework being replicated across Central Asia, you're watching the construction of a natural gas trading system spanning from the Arctic Circle to the Indian Ocean that operates largely outside Western financial oversight. The message transmitting to energy importing countries across the developing world is not subtle. For decades, energy security meant maintaining relationships with Western companies and accepting dollar-denominated pricing because no alternative existed. The Iran-Pakistan pipeline, financed by China and priced in yuan, proves an alternative now exists. It might cost slightly more. It definitely creates complications with Washington. But it also means your energy security stops depending on maintaining political relationships with governments 8,000 kilometers away who might decide to sanction you over some future policy disagreement. Gulf Arab states are studying these developments with particular attention despite their official positions supporting American regional policy. Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar dominate global LNG exports. The pipeline networks now spreading across Central and South Asia represent competing supply sources that could undercut their market dominance in the world's fastest growing energy consumption region. The Saudis have already started preliminary talks with Chinese state banks about yuan settlement mechanisms for oil sales, not to replace dollar sales entirely, but to create optionality that didn't exist 5 years ago. What burned into the ground in Washington's Iran policy over the past 18 months is not just one pipeline project. It's the assumption that American financial architecture gives Washington permanent veto power over global energy infrastructure. That assumption worked perfectly when every major project required Western bank financing, Western construction firms, and Western insurance coverage. The Iran-Pakistan pipeline required none of those things. Chinese state banks provided financing. Chinese contractors provided engineering. Chinese insurance backed the construction. And the entire value chain operated without a single American institution involved. This represents a systematic workaround to sanctions pressure that doesn't require confronting American power directly. It simply builds parallel infrastructure that makes American approval increasingly optional for countries willing to accept Chinese terms. Pakistan didn't defeat U.S. sanctions. It made U.S. sanctions less relevant by finding a completely different financial and technical pathway to the same strategic objective. Here are 3 predictions with specific timeframes attached. First, gas flows through this pipeline begin by October 2026. Not full capacity, initial flow of approximately 400 million cubic feet per day, while the final compressor stations come online. But enough volume that Pakistan can reduce LNG imports by 30% immediately. Second, within 8 months of first gas flow, at least 2 other South Asian countries announced similar pipeline or energy infrastructure projects financed through Chinese development banks using yuan settlement mechanisms. The model works. It spreads. Third, by first quarter 2027, American diplomats begin quiet negotiations with Pakistani officials about sanctions waivers related to this pipeline because shutting down energy supplies to a nuclear armed country of 240 million people creates more problems than it solves. The stakes here go beyond one pipeline or even one region. This is a test case for whether countries can build critical infrastructure outside Western financial systems and technical partnerships. Pakistan is essentially beta testing a model for Chinese financed, UN settled energy security that doesn't require American institutional involvement at any stage. If it works, if gas flows, if prices remain stable, if the financing structure holds up under operational stress, then every country facing American sanctions or simply wanting to reduce dependency on dollar denominated energy markets has a proven alternative model to follow. Drop your prediction in the comments. Which happens first? The gas starts flowing by October 2026, Pakistan cuts LNG imports by 30%, or Washington quietly negotiates a sanctions workaround to avoid destabilizing a nuclear armed ally. Tell me, because I read every single one, and the comment section on these infrastructure finance topics consistently produces insights I missed in the initial analysis. If this gave you a framework for understanding energy geopolitics that mainstream coverage ignored, the yuan settlement mechanism, the Chinese financing structure, the strategic implications for dollar dominance, share this with one person who needs to understand what's actually being built while everyone focuses on military headlines. The energy infrastructure getting constructed right now determines which currencies and which institutions control global trade for the next 30 years. The next video examines something even more fundamental than pipeline routes. It's about the payment systems being built to settle the trade those pipelines enable. Subscribe so you're there when it lands, because the financial architecture being constructed in the background of these energy projects is what actually ends dollar dominance, not speeches, not political declarations. Infrastructure and settlement systems that make dollars optional for an increasingly large portion of global trade. That's the story nobody's covering, and it's the one that matters most.